The following program contains the opinions of the host, guests, and call-in participants. These do not necessarily represent the views of this show's distributors or sponsors. This program may contain obscene, profane, or otherwise objectionable language. Viewer discretion is advised. Let's turn the mic on. Heidi Ho, everybody. Come to you cordless from glamorous Minneapolis. It's Tuesday night, March 10th, 2026. I'm Jim Peters. Welcome to another edition of Jim Peters at Night. This is episode number 323, if you're keeping score at home. Our guest tonight, man, we got a good one. This is John O'Connor's joining us. He's written a book. He was Deep Throat's attorney. That would be Mark Felt, the guy, we're going back to Watergate now, but still, this is all very important, precious stuff. And he basically wrote the article that, what? Oh, Jesus, Jim, come on. Told about Deep Throat in Vanity Fair, and wrote a book called Postgate about the whole affair and also how it's affected press at the present time. And he's joining us from his home office in Marin County, California. Hi, John. Thanks for coming on.
Be with you, Jim. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm babbling like an idiot. So we have to. I want you to set the stage here let me put your book on the screen here too. This is your book. It's called Postgate: How the Washington Post Betrayed Deep Throat, Covered Up Watergate, and Began Today's Partisan Advocacy Journalism. And God knows that's a whole thing. We could talk 2 hours about that alone. But when did you start working for Mark Felt? When did this start here?
To back up, when I was an assistant United States attorney back in 1974, the book All the President's Men came out with the revelation of Deep Throat. I became fascinated. I was a bachelor at the time and spent a lot of time in coffee shops and early evening having a beer, trying to figure out who Deep Throat was. And finally, by probably 1975, I figured out it was Mark Felt.
Oh, hold it. So you figured this out on your own, just from your own research, huh?
Right. I believe that I could, using circumstantial evidence, and I'm a federal prosecutor, could prove Mark Felt's identity as Deep Throat beyond a reasonable doubt to a unanimous jury. I always felt that it requires, deep circumstantial evidence, but I could do it. And I figured nobody would really care about what some young guy thought. And so I never did anything about it. Met my wife shortly thereafter and raised 3 children, and was living in Marin County with a daughter at Stanford. And at the very desk I'm sitting at now, the kitchen table I'm sitting at now, we had some Stanford kids over in 2002. Now, this is now 28 years after I figured it out. And I began talking about my father, who was a FBI agent in Brazil before he married my mother, and talked about how he was a terrible spy against the Germans and was the Germans figured him out right away. Whereupon a young man across from me said, well, your father may know my grandfather. He was with the FBI. I said, who was it? He said, Mark Felt. I said, Nick, your grandfather is Deep Throat. Can I come up and see him? I know why he's not admitting it. I'd like to come up and talk to him about it and tell him why I think he's noble and we should reveal this.
Okay, before you go on, I have to ask you. All right, you're sitting in a coffee shops just screwing around, and you figured this out. How come so many other people got this wrong?
Well, it's part of my pitch. It's part of my pitch about why the media is so bad today. The people who cared about it were media people, and they were the ones that were talking about it. I happen to be one of these things called the lawyer.
Yeah.
And lawyers actually understand circumstantial evidence. The people in the media thought, well, If we can figure out who smokes cigarettes and who's tall enough to take a key off of a ledge, we can figure out who Deep Throat is. And they had no idea. When you look at there was actually a class at University of Illinois, a journalism class of a master's program, in which at the same time I was trying to get the story published, they came out with a definitive 2-year multi-pronged study of who Deep Throat was, and they said it was Fred Fielding, John Dean's friend. And that kept one book publisher from publishing my book. They said, look, these people proved it. They proved the Deep Throat was Fred Fielding.
Right.
And I said, no, I don't think you understand proof. These folks don't understand evidence. They do not understand evidence, period.
Okay.
And if you don't understand evidence, you do not understand how to prove Mark Felt's Deep Throat.
I have to know, it sounds like we're getting off in the weeds here, but actually we aren't. This is one of my complaints about the media in general. Why is it that so many of these people can't figure out what I consider to be basic common sense? They can't seem to follow an evidence trail. And you think that's their job, but they can't do it. I'm starting to think it's a personality thing. What do you think?
First of all, you just said something, common sense. When you are taught to be a journalist, one thing you are not taught is common sense. As a matter of fact, you're taught to leave common sense at the door. Whereas a lawyer, once you get out of law school and you learn all this stuff, you really start your business then, because you're learning how to actually prove facts, which you don't learn in law school. But what you do is you're taking common sense and transferring it to the facts at hand to convince a normal person with common sense that what you're saying is right. And that's what a jury trial is all about, or a judge trial. Common sense fit into the legal framework that you're trying to prove. So what I would say is, and this is why I wrote the book Postgate, is that the antithesis of common sense is journalism. And the post coverage of Watergate sort of enshrined this idea that the people that really knew the truth are these people called journalists, that, boy, journalists are going to give us the key to what's right and what's wrong. And that's absolutely the opposite of what's true. They know. I'll give you another example.
Please.
I was sitting there I worked on the Patty Hearst trial, and I'm sitting there during the Patty Hearst trial, just as a young man, again, watching the trial, figuring it out. And I say, hey, we're kicking the hell out of these people in terms of F. Lee Bailey, in terms of whether Patty Hearst had free will. She did have free will, and I liked her, but she joined the SLA. So, but yet the newspaper, when they covered the same evidence I'm looking at, did not see it as the jury saw it. They saw it as journalists see it, and they saw it in terms of headlines and narratives and glitzy stories. And their reporting was exactly wrong. They took what a common sense person like you, not infected, hopefully, by bad journalistic teachings, would say, yeah, this is the prosecution's proving this case here pretty well, and their psychiatrists are better than the other psychiatrists. But it's almost as if the people that go through this journalism school are taught, in order to you're taught to do a great topic sentence and to have a theme, and then once Watergate came along, now you're there to tell society what's right and what's wrong, and you're there to really make everything good, clean, and true, and you're trying to transform common sense. And so it's almost as if we have this group of people that are teaching us that we have taught to be stupid. We have taught to these folks to ignore common sense rather than to take common sense and use it. And these folks have a lot of time on their hands. They have hundreds of people on their staff, and yet they get things wrong. So, for example, I just wrote an article about how Kristen Welker in Meet the Press, with all her staff, had the Georgia election completely off and completely wrong.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
So yeah.
Most of these places are way overstaffed, and I don't know if that's the reason they get so much wrong because you have too many cooks in the kitchen. I don't know, but it's mind-boggling. When I look at the staff numbers of some of these organizations, news organizations, it just blows my mind. You don't need that many people to do this. I mean, I know. I'm in production. I know how this works.
And remember, who are they supposed to please? Are they really supposed to please Jim Peters and John O'Connor, who are intelligent people looking at their telecast, or are they there to please each other and other journalists around town and in their own ecosystem? They're very good at that.
Oh,
The
yeah,
problem is that, and because they have superior knowledge, they say, then the fact that they conflict with Jim Peters and John O'Connor is almost a badge of honor because they really know the truth and we don't.
right.
Whereas they should be saying, look, Peters and O'Connor, they're common sense guys. They really are kind of more in touch with the normal person out there, the way the normal person would look at this. Maybe we ought to listen to them. Maybe we ought to see what they have to say and we can judge. We don't have to accept what they say, but why don't you take what they say and judge it and evaluate it to determine, and then we get back to John Stuart Mill. Let's have an argument. Let's take one side, let's take the other side and examine them. But you will find that they do just the opposite. If you try to examine a premise, then you're a bad guy.
That's right.
So that just is, and again, you know what that is? You will look it up. It is called disinformation and misinformation.
Yeah.
What Peters and O'Connor do is they spread disinformation and misinformation with their terrible conservative talk.
Yeah.
And there we are. So anytime you get objective truth proven, turns out that the common sense people are right. But often you don't have a laboratory to prove something in other than the world.
Right.
And we have seen
only the world.
Exactly, and we've seen how Joe Biden did as compared to common sense, and common sense seems to have won, but that
temporarily anyway. I hope
temporarily,
yeah,
temporarily. But at least we've seen that at least he was wrong on so many issues. But then again, there are people that were supporting him and saying that everything he did was just peachy keen.
Yeah, John. So before we go back to the story on Mark Fell, I do have to ask you, Patty Hearst, was she brainwashed, or did she actually consensually join this group?
No, she wasn't brainwashed. She thought that this was a wonderful group and it fulfilled everything that she thought, and I agree with her, was wrong with our society. She's over there at Berkeley with a bunch of, pot smoking hippie kind of intellectuals that talked about how bad our society was. And she kept saying, and she was a younger person engaged to this older guy. And she kept saying, you people just sit around and talk about this stuff. Why don't you do anything? You're not doing anything. And by the way, why am I supposed to do the dishes just because I'm a woman? Why don't you treat me equally to the men? And oh, by the way, fiance, aren't you too concerned about the wealth of my family and whether you're going to get good wedding gifts rather than what's really good and true and right? So she thought society, at least her brand of society, which was the folks at Berkeley, were full of it. And then she ends up with this group that were full of very well-meaning, sincere people. They just happen to be crazy radicals who wanted to kill people, but they're very nice. They're very nice people. They treated each other well. They were sincere. She fell in love with a guy that was just a really nice guy. And so I was the guy that hung around with a psychiatrist for a month. I know every dream that Patty Hearst has had, that a lot of them didn't come out in evidence because I would talk to him. I was with him every day. I was his babysitter. And so I understand Patty Hearst. I liked her. I liked her quite a bit, and he liked her. We both liked her and thought, okay, there's a very good and rational reason why a 21-year-old girl who's maybe not a tremendous intellect, but a common sense person, sort of a spunky, common sense young girl, would want to do this. And it made sense. It made a lot of sense. Now, once you get into actually the idea that you may have to kill somebody, that's a little bit different. And I
Right.
don't think they went out meaning to kill people, but it ends up that way.
Yeah.
But but the press did not get it. And so I was there in the middle of this whole thing, and every day there would be a gaggle of press around the um, courtroom, and my boss, one of my bosses, the head of the criminal division, would decide who got in. At the time, my fiance was out in San Francisco. We just lived together, and we're going to get married. And she went in every day herself, so she got a seat every day because my boss liked her. And so I got to also talk to her about her sort of views as a juror versus what was being put in the paper. And so I was convinced when the jury went out that the jury was going to come back very quickly, and they did. They came back very quickly. And there was a reason for that, because common sense ruled. And, remember, everyone who becomes radicalized for a reason. Some of the biggest terrorists there were sons and daughters of doctors and lawyers, and executives. They weren't brainwashed.
That's
Uh, you
You know,
know,
that's a little nugget of brilliance you have there, that everybody who's radicalized gets radicalized for a reason. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that's like, I think we have to keep that in mind. And the reason I actually asked you about all this is for the very reason you brought this up. What the press reported was so murky that I really didn't have I couldn't really grasp what was actually going on, you know?
right, exactly. And they don't have a good sense of that. And that was my criticism of Kristen Welker on this. Here's someone who is given a program, Meet the Press, and yet she's so far off in analyzing something that is right there, and she's ignoring a lot of things that are very patent and obvious,
Staring her in the face, right. Yeah,
staring her in the face. But those are things that she's probably been taught. Oh, that's just the rantings of MAGA. Let's tune those out.
right.
Let's tune those out. We're going to just, and that's what I'm talking about when you say, whenever people use the idea of misinformation and disinformation, what they're really saying is, here, all you people that I'm writing this to, when people start saying something against the conventional wisdom, it's misinformation. You could just tune it out. You don't have to deal with it like John Stuart Mill would say, and deal with it and try to determine what's true and what's false, what part is true, what part is false. No, you don't have to do that. You can just call it disinformation or misinformation. And so what we get is, we get an elite group in America, and people who don't understand the MAGA movement. We get a group of people in America that are controlling things that are completely without common sense,
Yeah.
and at the same time look down on people who actually challenge that conventional wisdom. And people don't understand that one of the reasons for Donald Trump was a dishonest media. People
Absolutely.
understood that here's a guy that comes along, and guess what he does? He just talks brutal, sometimes brusque and blustery common sense, but he just comes right out and says it. Maybe sometimes you know, he's not a polite person, and he says some things that are not politic, but that's not the point.
Right.
These people are so sick of conventional wisdom that is not wisdom at all, that they are refreshed by him. They don't understand. They created Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He would not have he would not have that great original groundswell were it not for these dishonest media people.
You couldn't put that better. That's right. They actually created him. As much as they hate him, they created him, you know. And I don't, like you're saying, I don't know a single Trump supporter who doesn't think that sometimes a guy can be a petty, vindictive jackass. There's no doubt about that, you know. But that's not the point, you know.
That's not the point at all. I'd rather suffer that. And right now we have a guy who's got enough guts to get rid of a nuclear bomb,
Yeah, really.
in face of people who say, well, there's no imminent threat. Well, I'm going to go to the dermatologist soon to take away my non-imminent threats of these squamous cells that are on my body. Oh, no, there's no imminent threat
No,
there.
oh, no,
Well,
no,
why are you taking them out? Let's wait until it metastasizes,
and kills
and
you.
then we can take it out. Yeah, then it's an imminent threat. Yeah, that's a real
That's
good
right.
idea.
That's right. I know. I mean, the Iranian regime has killed thousands of people in the last 40, thousands of Americans in the last 47 years, and all sorts of stuff. And how can you say they're not an imminent threat? I just find this hilarious. Well, anyway, I want to get back to hold it. Let's get back to your story. So you're sitting at your dining room table, and you said that one of the kids was Mark Felt's son. Was that what it was?
Mark Felt's grandson, yes.
Grandson, right? So okay,
And
so you start talking to Felt, right?
And I say, Nick, let me please talk to your mother. I know your granddad's denied it, but talk to your mother. I'd like to come up and talk to him. I think I know why he doesn't want to come out because I understood him. I also knew why he wasn't talking and why he would go to the grave with this. And I said, I think I can talk him into the idea that he's not a terrible person, that the normal, regular person in society to whom he feels fealty, the regular, solid citizen, will look at him as a hero because he did what was right and he kept our justice system free of corruption,
And,
even though he didn't probably foresee the end result. I don't
yeah.
think anybody saw that this would topple Nixon.
And what year
And
was this, John? What year did you actually start talking to him?
I started talking to him in 2002.
Two. Okay. All right.
And it wasn't until then I started talking to Woodward at Mark's direction to get his cooperation. And as I write in my book, Postgate, the last thing Woodward wanted to do was help out Deep Throat, which I found stunning. But after the more I talked to him, I realized this guy's just he wants to keep all the proceeds of the book for himself. I was talking about sharing profits, and they could have had so much fun doing joint lectures and talks and so forth. And
Yeah.
but 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 he had his own reasons, and we became sort of frenemies at that point. We kept in touch with him, but he clearly was. Once I convinced Mark's daughter that Woodward would not be cooperating with us, uh, she then did what I told her to do, which was to keep our project secret.
And
If
Mark was cogent at this time. I understand that he had some toward the end. He had some cognitive issues, but he did not then in
What I
2000.
would say is this: yes, he probably could not do well on a memory test, but people misunderstand the difference between Alzheimer's, in which you just don't know what the hell's going on, and normal dementia,
Right.
which, by the way, you and I have, and every person over 50 has some
Yes.
degree of it,
That's right.
because we have a certain amount of plaque in our hippocampus, like we have plaque in our heart, we have
Yeah.
plaque in our hippocampus, which keeps us from retrieving and forming memories. So he had that kind of vascular dementia, but in the short term, he had very good judgment and very good acuity. And then, of course, he would forget things and not keep things in mind. So when I talked to him, he was very receptive to me and understood that I understood him. Now, when I would leave him originally, then he would relapse and say, no, an agent doesn't act like this. I can't do what O'Connor wants me to. And then I'd come back and talk to him again, and he'd be cool. And then I worked with his daughter to talk to him. So it took us years.
Well, Mark, or I'm sorry, John. When you approached Mark the first time, did he admit he was a deep throat right away? When you told him, "I think you're a deep throat," how long did
No,
you?
he didn't.
How
No,
long
no,
did
he didn't. And what I did was the grandson and daughter were on the daybed next to Mark, and I started talking about deep throat. And I had qualified myself because I was an assistant U.S. attorney, knew Robert Mueller, knew William Ruckelhaus, his boss. And so I qualified myself as a law enforcement guy. My dad was an FBI agent, I was a prosecutor. And I said, we, the young people in the justice system, loved this guy, Deep Throat, third person. And Deep Throat was a hero, third person. Deep Throat, Deep Throat, Deep Throat. I could see his eyes melt. I was giving him absolution.
Hmm.
And he just looked at me like this. He didn't do what he had done in the past around his family and just deny adamantly and angrily that he was deep throat. Yeah, no, that's not true. Now here I'm talking to him and he's listening to him. And then I changed from third person deep throat to you. So you, Mark, should think about coming out and talking with me, and we can go out and maybe we could talk to Bob Woodward and come out. And so I started talking about you. Well, when I started talking about you, he didn't deny it. He was there like this. And a very shrewd guy. He still had his shrewdness. He's not going to be able to repeat what I said the next day exactly.
John,
But
you're shrewd. That's brilliant. I mean, that's a brilliant way to handle. I would not have thought of that to handle it that way. Maybe it's because you're a lawyer, maybe just because you're wise. But you, I mean, you set the scene for him so that it would be okay without actually having to ask him point blank. I just think that that's a brilliant way to handle it too.
well, I knew what his psychology was because one of the ways I knew he was deep throat was I knew his psychology.
Uh huh.
And I put myself in the position of a law enforcement guy faced with what he was faced with. So everything made sense. What he was telling Woodward, why he was telling him this, and so forth. And most people still to this day don't understand it. You read these Watergate books, they don't know anything. They just don't understand it. Nobody, and I've got a book out there that would explain it to everybody. But nonetheless, I understood it, and then I understood because I understood his motivation. That's why I talked about how the law enforcement community, especially the younger people represented by me, would look at Deep Throat as a hero. Now that took a long time for him really to accept that internally in his psyche that he's a true hero.
Yeah.
And interestingly, that took about 3 years. But that wasn't what retarded our revelation. What retarded our revelation is no one would believe me. No
Oh,
one would believe me that this was Mark Felt and that I had the goods. And because he had dementia, everybody thought, well, the lawyer and the daughter are just suggesting this to Felt, and
right.
it's a lot of BS. And Woodward would not confirm it. So Woodward's failure to confirm when he's written a book talking about he's oh so faithful to Mark Felt and loves the guy, and yet this guy who loves Mark Felt is not confirming, or loves Deep Throat is not confirming that Mark Felt is Deep Throat. Well, guess what? So meanwhile, as I point out in the book, Jim, and this is very interesting for your audience, I think, I go through this. Woodward, I allowed, of course, Bob to talk to the family. I'm not going to try to be a lawyer and cut off his communication. So he wanted to talk to the family. And of course, what he did was he hinted to them very strongly that their father was not Deep Throat and that it would be a terrible, terrible error for them to allow this man to go on a public stage and be embarrassed because it would just kill a guy that was 90 years old to be the subject of vituperation and ignominy because he was a Deep Throat. So the son, Mark's son, was convinced that Mark was not Deep Throat. The daughter would call me up occasionally and say, John, is dad really Deep Throat? So even though he has admitted it to his daughter is calling me up and saying, John, is he really Deep Throat? The only reason this thing held together at all was because I didn't need Mark's confirmation that he was Deep Throat. I knew he was Deep Throat and I could prove it several times over. And I tried to convince book publishers of that as well, but they don't understand evidence. They would listen to me and say, yeah, sounds right. And then same way, then they don't know how to evaluate evidence because they're in this same journalistic world. So here I am. I understand evidence. I would go through this. There was for one publisher, for the Time Life publisher, for the Time Inc., they had a very bright lawyer that would come to San Francisco and talk with me for hours. We had a contract signed. And then finally they got cold feet and they pulled out when they had to put their money down. I gave them 6 months to investigate. they would get convinced when I would talk to them, but then when it really got down to it, they did not have enough internal confidence that I was right because
Well,
they just didn't
you,
understand it. They don't understand evidence, and I do.
you said it took 3 years before for this process to play out. How many meetings did you have to have with Mark himself before he finally said, "I am Deep Throat"? How many? How many?
That's a very good question because that's at the beginning. I probably had 3 or 4 with him, 5 maybe, over a couple of months before he finally said, yes, I'm Deep Throat, but actually what he would say is, and I titled my article this, I'm the guy they called Deep Throat. I knew that Mark would truthfully say he wasn't Deep Throat because his name isn't Deep Throat and he didn't answer to Deep Throat.
Right,
So, in England, you say somebody's called Jim Peters. You don't say his name's Jim Peters. You say he's called Jim Peters and he answers to the name of Jim Peters.
right.
That's what it is. And if you don't answer to the name of Jim Peters, like I say, many of my opponent, the parties that I'm litigate against, call me that jackass lawyer. Well, I don't think I'm that jackass lawyer, and I don't answer to that. Somebody says, "Hey, jackass," I'm not going to say, "Hey, yeah, what do you want?"
Yeah,
So he very cleverly. So when I got him to admit it, I got him to admit that he was the guy they called Deep Throat.
yeah.
So and that was the way he kept himself from his denials, even in the grand jury, he was Deep
So
Throat.
did that make much difference with the publishers though, even though that he had actually admitted it at that point? That's kind of reason I asked this because I'm wondering, like you said, that there's so many people who didn't understand the evidence trail here that maybe it wouldn't even matter if he said he was deep throat, you know?
Well, it doesn't matter to them whether he said it or not because they knew he had dementia, and therefore they assume because he had dementia that he was therefore easily influenced.
Uh-huh.
And there's probably some distant uh, truth to that. Now, in this case, he was not influenced, but generally, if you know somebody's got dementia, you think, well, maybe they can be influenced. I don't discredit them. What I do discredit is I could describe his process of him fighting, of not admitting he's Deep Throat for 2 months, of going off with his caretaker and said, an agent just doesn't act like this. I can't say I'm Deep Throat. An agent doesn't act like that. So he fought me. He fought the revelation, is what I would say, as opposed to, or he was um, battling it, so to speak. When I first talked to him, as he would go back and forth, I would convince him. And then when he would get alone, he would have doubts. But my point is, even that struggle to me was a proof that he actually was Deep Throat.
Yeah.
He's not being, let's put it this way, he was not easily influenced. He did what he decided he would do. And it wasn't until, so finally when he admitted it, then he would only reveal himself if Bob Woodward agreed to cooperate. And
Well,
the reason,
and that was my next question because according to the public story here, Woodward did actually end up confirming that he was Deep Throat. So when did that happen? When did Woodward turn around?
oh, he only confirmed him after we published the article, and
Oh,
it was
really?
very clear. And there were very much yelling and screaming, according to Andrea Mitchell. There's very much yelling and screaming in the boardroom at the Washington Post as Ben Bradley and company are yelling at Woodward and Bernstein to finally admit that we have the goods. And the reason they wanted that is because they were missing the opportunity to publish their story
Right.
about Mark Felt and sell a lot of papers. So they did that, but no, Woodward would never admit it. And he actually thought, even after we kind of caught him off guard by publishing, but even then, he thought he could just kind of calmly brush it off as this may or may not be true. I'm not going to confirm or deny. But Bradley and these guys said, no, look, they've got such an overwhelming show of public support and belief that this guy's Deep Throat that we're not going to make it now. We're not going to be able to slough this off as just another kook coming along and claiming he's Deep Throat. So we had him there. And finally, after we were out for a couple of days of revelation, finally Woodward and Bernstein admitted it. Ted Koppel was interviewing me at the time they admitted it, and he was trying to get me to do various things that the Post wanted me to say. And right in the middle of our interview, which was somewhat contentious, I thought it was fun, but it was contentious, and he and I were having fun, Koppel and I, because I knew the game he was playing. And right then, somebody comes in and interrupts our interview, which is being taped, like you and I are taping this now. They said, Ted, the Washington Post has just announced that they agree that Mark Felt is deep throat. So we both started laughing. And Koppel said, well, I guess I'm going to have to re-record this interview, aren't I? And so we laughed, and then we did a new interview because he no longer had to batter me now
Right.
to get facts that the Post wanted. And the Post was looking for some basis upon which it could finally confirm this and some excuse to say, oh, well, now we have X fact and we can confirm it. And, we've been principled up to now, but now our principles are now satisfied and we can reveal it and make a lot of money. So it was very much fun, the psychology of it. But what I got out of all this was, you're dealing with with an industry that is anything but dealing with the truth. Here, Mark and I and the daughter, we cared about the truth. We're just basic, normal folks telling
Yeah.
what's what. And back up to a fairly well, and yet we're fighting the people that were supposedly our protectors. Is a journalist really a protector of sources? No, I don't think so. If you remember the movie The Insider, where they dealt with that fellow who sort of ratted out the tobacco industry, that movie, and I forget who's in it now. Russell Crowe might be the guy that played the insider, who is something of a nut job, frankly, and all that stuff. But the people who use you for their own purposes are not your friends. They're there to use you. And that's another thing. That's what journalists, and that's what I got from this is, Mark Felt was just something to be used by the Post and by Woodward, and not necessarily an end in itself, somebody that they really care about, so.
Well, you said, or anyway, your publishers on the blurb on your book, which unfortunately I did not get a chance to read, but I read a lot about it, and I can promise to the viewers that your book's absolutely fascinating, even though I haven't read it. I've read so much about your book, I can say that with distinction. But the blurb on your book was that you thought that this whole exercise ended up basically covering up Watergate more than it actually revealed it. So, and you still think that's true?
Yeah. I go through the book in Postgate. Besides going through this dance I did with the Washington Post, which sort of shows their lack of, truth telling or public duty. I go into because of some of their actions, I began doubting whether or not they fully reported Watergate. And as much as I was a student of Watergate, I had not kept up over the years on various developments, factual developments. And I had begun looking at those, just started out of curiosity. But then I began to realize from the Post reactions to some of the things I wanted to say that that Watergate itself may have been covered up, that the reporting of Watergate was not this wonderful stream of unmitigated truth that they talk about. And so I'm the first person and the only person so far that has taken the articles in Watergate. Now, this is amazing. As much as people talk about Watergate journalism, I'm the only person that's ever done this, is taken all the articles that the Post published in Watergate for 2 years, and there are like 3,000 of them. I've got them in my garage right now. gathering mold. But nonetheless, I've got him, and I know him better than a normal person should. But they covered up Watergate. They had facts that I talk about in Postgate that would really alter materially. These are not immaterial facts. These are facts that you would present to a jury if you're going to talk about what happened in Watergate. Key central facts were covered up by Watergate, by the Post during Watergate, and all to the detriment of Richard Nixon, and also to protect the Democratic Party. And incidentally, I don't think their main motive was protecting the CIA. But if you protect the CIA, you are protecting your case against Richard Nixon. The CIA had clearly infiltrated the White House and the committee to reelect the president. There's no doubt about it today. And that they were behind much of this, along with John Dean for his own personal blind ambition purposes. But the Oval Office had nothing to do with this, and it was not a campaign operation. But they do not want you to know that. They did not want you to know that, because if you did, it would have made Nixon. Yes, Nixon skulked, and Nixon was not exactly Mr. Transparent, let it all hang out guy. He had a tricky dick side to him. But the fact is, he did not have anything to do with this burglary. As Nixon said, Jim, and this is sort of funny, Nixon said, I don't mind people thinking I'm a crook. I do mind people thinking I'm this stupid. Why would I ever want to break into this? It made no sense.
Well, you're an attorney. I have said this for many years, that it's obvious in retrospect that Richard Nixon knew nothing about this actual burglary ahead of time. If he had went to the White House press room like a day afterwards and said, "Look, there's this burglary. I knew nothing about it. These guys from the Republican committee busted into the Democratic headquarters. We're going to see that they're prosecuted under the full extent of the law." And if he just announced it, we would not even be talking about this. I don't think no one would have ever cared.
And he would say, he should say, yes, this happened. I didn't have anything to do with it, and we're going to really take action here and find out who's to blame. And if he would have brought in an independent lawyer, to do this, then the independent lawyer would have immediately put John Dean on the griddle and Gordon Liddy, and you would have found out how this thing started, and it would have told the story,
right,
and so forth. So because he was not, Nixon did not decide to go clean on this. That's bad. But he was hiding something he didn't know what he was hiding. He just knew, he felt that somebody out there must have done this. And see, that's another problem, because things were so opaque. He always felt, and until probably March or April of 1973, that John Mitchell, his good buddy and friend, and who would be associated with Nixon, he was head of the campaign, knew about this and ordered this. Now, as it turns out, Nixon did not ever confront his friend as he should have right away. He should have had Mitchell in that office the next day saying, "John, did you do this?" And really get into it with him. Because what happens is, and it's in the White House tapes, everyone comes to this epiphany that Mitchell didn't have anything to do with this, but it wasn't until March of 73. Well, right about then, John Dean's saying, I think I might go talk to the prosecutors here, after a sort of a stupid cover-up, and so it's just stupid. And meanwhile, then James McCord is one of the big truth tellers. He comes out with this terrible thing about, they're trying to shut me up and everything. Well, James McCord loved this because he loved to point at the White House. He was a CIA guy all the way. He didn't want to admit it was the CIA. Now, here's something that the Post knew. I'll give you one thing that the Post knew, and the prosecutors, Nixon's prosecutors knew, and the prosecutors never talked to the White House about this. Howard Hunt was preparing his defense in the fall of 72, right after this burglary happens, before things break open. He's preparing a defense called the CIA defense. His defense at trial is going to be, I am not guilty because I was on a CIA operation here, and I therefore figured it was legal. Now, let's stop there. This guy was going to say this. The prosecutors thought, oh, well, that's going to mean you're going to get an acquittal. We don't want to acquit you. Now, wait a second. Why not tell the White House, by the way, this was the CIA, by the way, rather than saying Hunt's lying, saying, wait a second, this guy may have something. He says it's a CIA operation. Maybe it was a CIA operation. And shouldn't the White House embrace this? Well, the White House never really learned about it. John Dean convinced Hunt to plead guilty. They killed his wife. I'm convinced they killed his wife. She died in an airplane crash as she was going to visit a witness in Chicago on December 5th, 1972, as the trial's coming up.
Is this John Mitchell's wife, you mean?
No, Howard Hunt's wife.
Howard Hunt's wife, okay.
Howard Hunt's wife was a CIA agent herself,
right.
Dorothy Hunt, until she was fired from the Spanish embassy where she was a plant at the time of Watergate. Then she was helping him out with his CIA defense, and I think the CIA had her killed. That's my thought, but maybe it was just a coincidence, and the CIA was very lucky that this plane crashed going to Chicago. But she was there to talk to the person that sold James McCord the wiretapping equipment. The wiretaps were set, or at the time, no, they'd already, McCord was seeking the construction of a device that would intercept conversations, but beam them up to a CIA satellite.
Uh-huh.
Now, at the time, there were very few satellites out there. The CIA had one of them. And this fellow in Chicago could only give that, prepare those devices, get them, I'm going to fabricate it, I guess is the best word, get a device such as this fabricated if it was done for a certified intelligence agency. He checked with the CIA and found that, yes, McCord was working on a CIA mission. This was approved by the CIA. And yes, he would then fabricate a device that uploaded a listening device to the CIA satellite. Now, that was still on order at the time of the arrests. But what the CIA had planned on doing was planning another device that would then transmit. You wouldn't need to have human monitors. But they felt that they got presidential approval for an otherwise illegal set of activities. That is to say, listening to prostitutes and their johns in the United States, as opposed to France or someplace where it's legal.
Yeah, because technically the CIA can't operate in the United States, right?
Right. Unless, here's the big deal. This is what Watergate is about. Unless the president, as head, commander-in-chief and head of national security, says you can.
Oh, okay.
The president could have Jim Peters shoot Adolf Hitler if he thought it was in the national interest for national security. And Abraham Lincoln could free the slaves on the basis of national security, which he did, not because otherwise it's unconstitutional, but Abraham Lincoln did it under his national security powers. You can order the CIA to listen to prostitutes, and they felt they had that authorization through John Dean and arguably, but incorrectly, through John Mitchell. They thought, well, okay, the president's authorized this. We have enough authorization. This program is okay. So now McCord is out there ordering devices that beam up to a satellite. Now, Dorothy Hunt's going there to talk to this witness, and who knows what for, but she gets killed in the crash. The name of the CIA agent, there actually was, I believe it was Mark Felt, actually tried to get the story published in an outfit called Chicago Today.
Mm-hmm.
And there were stories published in May of 1973 about this in Chicago Today that no other newspaper re-reported. But if you recall in the movie, the Deep Throat movie, Deep Throat comes into the garage on his last meeting, frazzled. He's completely upset. Watch out, they're wiretapping you and they might kill you, if you remember that. And then both in the book and the movie, Woodward goes to Bernstein's apartment. They huddle. They turn on the record player loudly so that no one can overhear him. They go to Ben Bradley's house. They're so afraid of being wiretapped, they go out to his yard and talk about this in the middle of the night. That is because the CIA was threatening people at the time. They actually killed one fellow who was going to rat, and not just Dorothy Hunt, but a fellow named Lou Russell. So they were killing people at the time. And the Post knew this. The Post knew this, that the CIA was now worried about uncovering of their part in this and was now threatening lives and wiretapping people. And Deep Throat told them about this, knew about, had learned about McCord and this fellow in Chicago, the wiretap fabricator, the listing device fabricator. And he was the source for Chicago Today. If you look at the two articles on May 13th and May 14th of 1973, you'll see that there's a quote, federal investigator that is talking to a reporter there. And it is Mark Felt. This is the same time he's going into I'm sorry, my dates are May 11th and 12th. He goes into Woodward's, into the garage May 13th. To tell Woodward about this. And Woodward doesn't publish anything about it. He puts it in the movie, he puts it in the book, and we're all so thrilled about this. And my question is, why isn't there an article about this, Bob? If you're really talking about everything, why is there not an article about this? And why is there not an article about McCord's sort of secret asset agent, not a CIA agent, but a dirty worker for McCord?
So what's the answer to that question, John? Why isn't there?
Well, the reason they didn't do it was because it would ruin the case against Nixon. They also knew, by the way, that this fellow's name's Lou Russell was poisoned right around the same time that Mark Felt is warning him. So they had a story that not only is the CIA doing this stuff and threatening lives, that probably Dorothy Hunt was killed, but we know that Lou Russell was killed. He was poisoned. Lou Russell said, they changed my heart medication for poison. I'm poisoned. He had a terrible heart attack and lived for another month, but he died.
Yeah.
But he said, I've been poisoned. And, and it's what the CIA calls aspirin roulette. You put in poison in the thing, and one of those things is one of the pills is poison. So Woodward knew this. Well, this is one of the many things that Woodward knew that I go into my book. He knows about this. I'm not making it up because it's in Woodward's own notes.
John, I had Robert Tannenbaum, who was Nixon's personal attorney, on this show, and he said, so I was running past him. There's certain conspiracy theories which are basically nuts about how the actual break-in went, because people said, well, they planned to get caught. Well, based on the circumstances, that would have been virtually impossible. But what Tannenbaum said is that the Democrats weren't expecting anything to happen, but when it happened, they completely pounced on it, decided to run with this and get Nixon out. They realized right away they could get Nixon out of office for this. That's what Tannenbaum told me.
Well, yeah. Remember this, my book says everything. I will tell you that. And so not that you will find that Tannenbaum's very close to correct, but let me just give it's very, very complicated that, the Democrats knew, and the Post knew right away, that this was all about the prostitute operation.
Yeah.
The Democrats knew that there was a secretary named Maxie Wells that were referring out-of-town Democrats to this phone hookup with the bordello down the hall. Okay, so they knew that the very first day of the arrest. They caught one burglar who was a CIA agent, by the way. One of the burglars was an active CIA agent from Miami. And he was caught with a desk key that he tried to rid himself of, and the cop caught him and almost broke his arm. That was the key to Maxie Wells' desk, which held the information about the various prostitutes and their Johns and so forth. And that's one of the, remember, the second burglary was not so much about listening to people as it was to getting documents.
Right.
And that's the documents they were after. So what happens is the Democrats immediately covered that part up and figured a good offense is a good defense. And so they went after the Republicans right away, but they were hiding something by doing that. And they were worried about this from day one. And when the trial came up, and they were afraid that the wiretap monitor would talk about listening to dirty talk, which is what he was listening to. He was prepared to say that what he was overhearing in the 2 weeks, they'd had the first burglary that was successful. For 2 weeks, he was listening to the phones. And for 2 weeks, most of what he was listening to was what he called explicitly intimate conversation.
Mhm.
That is to say, talking about my problems with my wife and let's have dinner and sex to follow. Now, he was not allowed to testify to that at the trial. Why? And the prosecutors wanted that in. And the Post hired a guy to come in, a very good lawyer, civil rights lawyer, to come in and say, you can't get into this. For various reasons, it's, would really,
Right.
it would really harm people. It would lead to all sorts of inadmissible testimony about bad things. Anyway, Judge Sirica, I think in consultation, I believe, with some Democrats, allowed this guy to come in and argue. He had no standing to come in and argue. Who is he? He's not part of the case. He comes in and he says, I want this testimony stopped. And the judge allowed him after consultation. He originally refused, as he should have. Judges don't do this. I'm a criminal prosecutor. You can't come in and just say, Jim Peters can't come in and say, hey, I don't want this testimony in. It's going to hurt me.
Right.
You can't do that. Say, hey, get out of here, Peters. Who are you? This is a case between the defendant and the prosecution. Well, this is what Judge Sirica originally ruled until he went into his chambers and came back out and said, oh, I've had second thoughts about this. Now, who did he talk to then? His mentor in getting him a job was Edward Bennett Williams, who was the partner of Williams and Connolly, and Williams and Connolly were the general counsel both for the Washington Post and the Democratic National Committee. So think about it. The Washington Post and the Democratic Committee were joined at the hip.
Yeah. So what else to do?
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, and when the Post first came out in 1878, they advertised themselves as being the paper for the Democratic Party. So they've always had a connection to the Democratic Party. And so that was going on at the time. Basically, that testimony was stopped, but the Democratic Party, together with the CIA, now the CIA was very much involved in quashing things too, so they were both trying to quash things. They had the only, and remember this, another thing about this, Gordon Liddy was actually an honest guy, as crazy as he was.
Yeah.
But he thought he was helping Nixon by steadfastly refusing to testify at all. And he went to jail and he was a hero. But if he would have told what he knew about how he got involved in this, he was kind of innocent. He actually thought he was doing something that would help the Republican Party in the campaign. He could not figure out why this was a campaign operation, but he thought it was a campaign operation that was stupid. And he was right. It was stupid if it was a campaign operation, but he never said how he got into this. And as it turns out, he got into it because John Dean convinced him to get into it.
Is this, John, is this an apocryphal story, or is it real about the fact that in one of these trials, Gordon Liddy took the stand and they said, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And he said, no. Is that true?
No, I don't think it's true because he never would testify. He went to jail and actually got in fights in jail and he was a tough guy. Then later on, when he came out with the theory that I'm talking about now, later on, he kind of came to Jesus. And now this is now 20 years later, and he's got a radio show, and he's talking about this prostitution angle, and he gets sued by John Dean because he sort of implicated Dean's fiancee, Maureen, as having been maybe one of the girls whose pictures was in Maxie Wells' desk.
Uh-huh.
So Dean was offended and he sued. And the results of that are very unclear because it was settled, but it's not clear that it was settled favorably to Dean, but it got settled. And I know the guy one of the guys he sued, the guy who wrote one of the books called Silent Coup. And he just recently died, but I was a very good friend of his. And I knew all the background of this, but basically I'm not so sure Dean's suit was very successful. But the point is that Gordon Liddy on his radio show finally came to the belief that this was a cover-up of a bordello operation is what it was.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying to you ended up Liddy would say he was fooled.
Right.
He would admit that he was fooled. And I always believed that. And he was kind of the dupe. He had the money. He was the guy that kept all the money and could dole it out. To the burglars.
Well,
and so they needed him.
Yeah. Let's fast forward to the present day. So
Sure.
so based on everything you said, and also and your book, my personal opinion, so tell me if I'm wrong here. My personal opinion is that when we looked at Watergate 50 years in the past, in some ways it's child's play to the crap that's going on now. And Nixon ended up, being booted out of office for that. And we have stuff going on now that's actually way, way worse than that stupid burglary, don't we? I mean, talking about the press not covering stuff.
Yeah, you've brought up two good questions. Number one, let's assume it's true that Nixon was somehow implicated in the burglary. Is it that big a deal when we have Barack Obama wiretapping James Rosen? That's okay.
Yeah, right.
Or stopping the 501c3 corporations through Lois Lerner and stopping them from being, much worse than anything in Watergate. And we take that as just being sort of normal stuff. Yes, it is. Watergate was very much magnified. It was exciting because it was the first time anything like this kind of got publicized. It was the first big scandal where anybody really got into stuff. Who knows how much stuff Franklin D. Roosevelt did, but, in Hoover looking for communists. So, yes, it looks like child's play today. And it was just thrilling and exciting at the time. And Nixon was a prototypical cartoonish villain, as he's been made to be. Right. Tricky Dick and all that. And there was this sector of society which I was in, the young folks, as you were at the time, who were very much against the Vietnam War, and we all distrusted anyone under 30 and all that nonsense. And so it was really a very thrilling time to see all this stuff uncovered. It sort of made sense for all this paranoia we had about all these older people that were trying to get us killed in Vietnam and were depressing the civil rights movement. At the time, if you recall, Martin Luther King sort of conjoined the cause of civil rights with that of Vietnam, and it all became one massive movement, so to speak, and gay rights were involved in the Stonewall riots in New York, and so it was all of a piece. And so the younger folks, the Democrats at the time, sensed all these conspiracies, and Watergate seemed to give proof to those conspiracies. And today, though, of course, this stuff that's going on is much worse. The dirty tricks. Watergate was about dirty tricks that Richard Nixon had nothing to do with. And everybody assumed that he's this terrible guy. And he did a few things, but it was just really not much at all.
No,
They had.
It wasn't, was it? No, that's right.
You had the Donald Segretti dirty tricks where Nixon did know about Donald Segretti, which is one of the things that came out. And again, people kind of confuse that with Watergate. But Donald Segretti was a young operative out of the military who was going around trying to sabotage Democratic rallies. For instance, he would remove a sign that told people when to meet for a campaign rally, and he would put the wrong time on it. He would change the time, and people would show up at the wrong time. That's the kind of stuff Nixon did do at the time, or Nixon commissioned to have done. But that's child's play, and that's something that was always done. And remember, when John F. Kennedy ran for president, everybody thought it was real cute. He had a guy named Dick Tuck, who was a trickster. And Dick Tuck would play all these games that everybody in the press thought were so funny and so cute that he did dirty tricks. So, for example, Nixon would be at a whistle stop train campaign where he would stop at a place and talk out of the back of a train to a crowd. They'd go to the next place and talk out of the back of the train. Well, Dick Tuck, one time, Nixon's stopping at a place in Missouri someplace. He starts to give his talk, and the train starts pulling away as he's talking. And Dick Tuck had paid $50 to the engineer to go a little, to just forget the time. And everybody thought that was very funny, and I think it's funny.
I do too.
And that's the kind of stuff that was done, and that's about the worst that Nixon did.
Yeah.
And that was old time. Those were old time classic dirty tricks that had been going on for time immemorial. And those, so now today we've got this nasty stuff. I mean, we've got a lot of sabotage out there, and people are getting indicted and so forth when they shouldn't be indicted, and it's kind of nasty.
Yeah. Where do you see it going? Is it going to get worse?
Well, I think one of the things that's good is the public has been to somewhat inured and educated to it. And I don't know. I still think you have a press that is terrible and will try to invent a scandal whenever possible, as long as it's being done by a conservative. It's being done by somebody else. I mean, you remember Ashley Babbitt got shot during January 6th. I don't recall anybody really getting outraged at the fact that some woman was shot and she was not hurting anybody or slugging.
No, you're right. She wasn't. I lose you here?
I agree, and that's not a good thing, and she should have been arrested for malicious mischief.
Right.
But okay, that's okay. We can shoot her. So everything depends upon the way it's portrayed in the press, and so I think we're going to keep up with that. That's something that's with us.
Yeah, I know, that's what I see too, and also social media doesn't make it any better either. I got John, I have to thank you for joining us today. I actually I'm going to read your book now because I found this just a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's an interesting book, I'll tell you that. I just think
let's put it back on the screen here. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's good reading. I mean, it's if you want to know about Watergate, that's all in there.
Yeah. If next time I come to California, I'm going to come see you sometime, if that's all right.
Let's have a bite. Let's have a bite, or a cup of coffee, or even a beer. Okay.
Yeah, I would. I'd like that a lot. You take care. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Take care, Jim.
Thanks. Our thanks to John O'Connor there. This is our 323rd show, and that's easily one of the most fascinating people I've ever talked to, at least as far as the subject matter is concerned. I mean, Watergate is a very historic thing, and to hear this basically right from the horse's mouth, it's pretty amazing. I gotta admit, I was completely captivated by the whole thing. We're not going to do snooze news tonight because that was relatively long, and also, toward the end there, you actually had to concentrate to keep track of all the scorecard. I'm kind of blown away. I'll be perfectly blunt with you, but I want to tell you about what we have coming up in the next couple days, because this is also pretty cool too. Tomorrow, Wednesday, the 11th, we have Robert Bork Jr. on. This is the son of Robert Bork, the guy who almost became a Supreme Court justice in the 1980s. Matter of fact, the term bork now, to be borked, is basically a verb to be nominated for a government position and not get it because it's all screwed up. I mean, he kind of got screwed. But Robert Bork Jr. has a book out called The New Paradox, which is actually kind of sort of a play on Robert Bork Sr.'s most famous book called The Antitrust Paradox. And what Bork Jr. is talking about here in his book is he's talking about what he calls the threat of conservative socialism. And I don't really know what that means, and we'll find out from him tomorrow. That's tomorrow. Thursday, Rabbi Michael Barkley is going to be here. Very famous rabbi. We're going to be talking about the situation over in Iran and Israel. Now, this just happened, and I kind of previewed this a little bit yesterday. On Monday, this coming Monday the 16th, our guest is going to be Katie Asher, and you may not recognize her name, but you're probably familiar with this. She and a bunch of others did a podcast series and a documentary called The Telepathy Tapes. Katie's book is called The Book of Heaven, and it's based on the fact that her son, who's severely autistic, appears to be telepathic. This has been in the news a lot. The podcast version of the series of this actually ended up for the month of December outranking Joe Rogan. It was the #1 podcast in America. So she's going to be on Monday, and I'm really looking forward to talking to her because there's all sorts of implications of what's going on here. They're about consciousness. She drags religion into it. Not that it should or shouldn't be. We'll find out from her. Her book is more about the spiritual side of what's going on than the documentary and the podcasts indicated. So I'm really looking forward to talking to her too. Anyway, that's what we got coming up the next few days here. We're lucky people. I want to thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. I want to thank John O'Connor for joining us too. Really appreciated that too. Good guy. Very, very just fascinating getting stuff from the horse's mouth. Good night, Uncle Donnie, wherever you are. And good night to you, wherever you may be. We'll see you tomorrow night, folks. Robert Bork Jr. Take care.